The danger monsters all seem to originate from the realm of danger, a treacherous island that happens to harbor mythical legends from various different cultures from around the world, from the Scottish Nessie to America's Bigfoot and Mexico's Chupacabra. These monsters all have different typings to reflect the beasts that they are, but one thing that they all have in common is that they love to scare and surprise humanity, which we can see translated into gameplay as these monsters can jump scare your opponent by revealing themselves in your hand to activate their main effect. Although, unlike a lot of the engines we've discussed in this series so far, there isn't really a defined combo or set way you're supposed to use the dangers. Instead, this engine can theoretically be splashed into any strategy, at least theoretically, because the best part about this archetype is that it provides bodies while also acting as a pseudo-consistency boost. You see, like we previously mentioned, every danger has an effect to reveal itself in your hand, and then after discarding a card, you get to summon the danger monster revealed from your hand, and then you get to draw one card, which makes these great as upstart goblin-like cards that also net you monsters on the field for your extra deck plays, all while remaining neutral in terms of card advantage. There's just one big catch that prevents these monsters from seeing play in everything. The card you discard with their effect will always be random, which puts you at risk of discarding a good starter, a power play, or even the danger itself, which would prevent you from summoning and drawing a card. Usually, this level randomization is a death sentence for an engine of extenders. But interestingly, in this case, it's not that big of a deal, because every danger also has a secondary effect that will activate whenever they're discarded, including by their own effect. So, while the risk of pitching an important card is still present, you're in a can't-lose scenario where if you discard the danger, you'll get a positive effect, and if you don't, you get a virtually free body and a draw. As a result of being such versatile special summons, many different strategies and archetypes across the years have used them in all kinds of ways, depending on the deck's goal and the ban list you're working with. For example, decks focused on level and rank 3 monsters will usually max out on Danger Suchino and Danger Jackaloupe, because no matter which effect you get to use, both of them guarantee a level 3 body on the board. This package can further be expanded to include 1 to 3 copies of Nessie. Generally speaking, Suchino, Jackaloupe, and Nessie are usually the most reliable of the dangers as they all have effects on discard that are guaranteed to net you something no matter the situation, which is part of why they'll appear in deck lists more often compared to the others. If you care about the bodies, but also value the discards that the dangers give you as well, then it's worth playing 1 or more copies of Danger Mothman. And if you're willing to play a copy or 2 of Danger Chupacabra, you not only get greater access to rank 4s, but in certain strategies you can take advantage of its fiend typing. But this package can expand even further, including 2 of the archetype's level 8 monsters in Bigfoot and Thunderbird, at 1 to 3 copies depending on your preferences, because while their discard effect isn't amazing when going first, they have incredible effects on the draw that can help push through a board if discarded to get halfway to a rank 8. The only danger monsters that generally don't see too much play are Dogman and Ogopogo, just because they have mediocre discard effects and are just outclassed by their peers. But because they can help swarm the field anyway, these cards are still potential options that are worth considering depending on the deck. In fact, the cool part about dangers as a whole is that none of these ratios are hard rules. You could choose to play a single copy of Suchino if you didn't want to give up deck space, or just play 3x Danger Bigfoot with nothing else for its going second strength. Likewise, you might want to enable a rank 7 strategy with Nessie and Dogman, or even just Mothman if you always want to be able to discard something. But for being so versatile, the archetype does have one major flaw that prevents it from standing on its own merits. Every one of the spell and trap cards are terrible and should be avoided at all costs, especially if you're using the dangers as an engine. Now that we've got an idea of the realm of danger's local wildlife, let's put our best researcher's hat on to really analyze just how these legendary creatures work. As previously mentioned, every danger monster has 2 effects. The first is an in-hand effect that will cause you to reveal a danger in your hand, and then your opponent will randomly choose a card for you to discard. And then if the card your opponent happens to choose isn't the danger monster you revealed, you then get to special summon that monster from your hand and draw 1 card. We've already covered most of the nuances behind this effect earlier. Depending on their level and type, every one of the dangers can net you access to all kinds of different extra deck monsters, so getting to bring them out from your hand for close to free is strong. And while there will always be a discard involved, you regain that card advantage by being able to dig 1 card deeper into your deck if you don't discard your danger, which in a technical sense is entirely card neutral. This doesn't shake up games too much, but when you start to think about the extra consistency that this effect provides, as well as the potential graveyard effects that could give you access to if you discard them, then it's easy to see how the dangers could potentially let certain strategies get out of hand. Now, it's important to note that when you use this effect and don't discard your danger, while the worst case scenario is that you end up card neutral, you'll have one less card in your hand since your danger will be on the field. So if you keep using danger monsters, then eventually you're going to run out of cards to pitch. This is one of the big reasons why you don't just see dangers everywhere, because unless your deck can natively make up for the hand economy you lose, then you're just throwing random bodies on the board. But if your deck is capable of gaining hand advantage in spite of, or even because of your danger discards, such as decks like Dark World, then this engine suddenly becomes maniacal, as every danger activation will net you more and more, while also drawing you into more dangers to keep the chain rolling. This is especially potent because this particular effect isn't a hard once per turn. So if you're playing a particularly dense package, then the likes of Nessie drawn into a second Nessie isn't a problem at all. If anything, it's a solution. The other big nuance you need to pay attention to is that when a card is sent to the graveyard for this effect, it is specifically discarded for effect. Now in Yu-Gi-Oh, there are sometimes a lot of ways of doing virtually the same thing, with the only distinguishing factors sometimes being the specific wording. A card like Forbidden Droplet looks like it's doing the same thing as a danger discard, but not only does droplets send for cost, as indicated by the position of the semicolon in its text, but its wording is specifically that it sends the card to the graveyard, which doesn't count as discarding. This means that a card like Droplet would never be able to trigger the effect of a Dark World monster, which usually need to be discarded for effect to activate. But this same quirk is exactly why the dangers are such a strong engine for this deck in particular, since they specifically discard for effect, allowing for a Dark World or Tearlaments monster to trigger. Likewise, the fact that they discard also means that they can trigger the second effect of another danger if they happen to be pitched, which is amazing because some dangers have some excellent secondary effects, although these effects can only be used once per turn. This second effect is the main thing that differentiates the power between each danger, because while some of them are so strong that they've seen time in the Forbidden and Limited lists, others really make you question if they're actually dangerous at all. For example, Danger Dogman has a terrible secondary effect, as when it's discarded, all it does is lower the attack of all of your opponent's face-up monsters by 1000 until the end of the turn. And while this definitely makes your opponent's monsters weaker and easier to beat over, it doesn't have any kind of immediate impact on the game state, and no impact at all if you happen to be going first. As a result, Dogman rarely ever sees any use in competitive decks trying to take advantage of the dangers, and when it does pop up, it's usually for its first effect, which makes a fine enough extender if you need a dark or level 7 monster on your field. But if that were the case, you'd be far better served by Danger Nessie. Nessie has the same first effect as any other danger, having the potential to summon itself from your hand and draw a card if you don't discard it, but marks itself as a cut above Dogma, because if it happens to be discarded, then you'll get to add any danger card from your deck to your hand, other than another copy of Nessie. This is great, as it means that if your Nessie gets sniped by your opponent and you were really hoping to get that draw, a body on field, or discard a certain card, then Nessie tilts the odds in your favor by just giving you another shot. Although what drives this effect over the edge is that, just like the other dangers, this effect triggers whenever it's discarded by any means. So if you happen to use the likes of Dark World Dealings or a purely spell that would otherwise cost you card advantage, by choosing to discard Nessie, you'll regain the advantage you just lost. And in doing so, you'll get the opportunity to add another extender to your hand that's also a good discard. Now, there is one more aspect of Nessie and all the other dangers that's easy to miss, as well as being differentiated by level. The dangers also all have different types, which can lend them to see play in different decks that need more of that type. In the case of Nessie, it being a Dark Aqua monster was a great bonus in a deck like Danger Tearlaments. You see, if you use Nessie's in-hand effect and discarded a Tearlament card, then you'll have the opportunity to trigger their graveyard effect. But even if you hit Nessie, that's still a positive, because not only will you get another danger, you now have a Dark Aqua monster in your graveyard, which makes it a perfect piece of fusion material to pair with Tearlament's effect, allowing you to dip into the likes of Gurara, Kaleido Heart, and of course Tearlament Kitkalos. So generally speaking, if you need a level 7 danger monster, Nessie has proven itself more than reliable. But if we get a deck that benefits from level 7 Beast Warriors, then maybe even Dogman might become more common. If you're wondering about the best danger to grab from Nessie's effect, then there are a myriad of different answers that will depend on the situation you're in and the deck you're playing. But you'll rarely ever be disappointed if you choose Danger Jackaloupe. Because when Jackaloupe is discarded, you get to special summon a danger from your deck in defense position as long as it's not another copy of itself. This is great if your main goal danger is to use them to swarm a bunch of bodies onto the field. As with Jackaloupe, as long as you have a second danger in deck, then there's no losing when you trigger its in-hand effect. And like with Nessie, if you pair Jackaloupe with a card that discards, you get to make them even stronger by turning what would be a loss into an advantage, with material on field that can be used for an extra deck play. And also like Nessie, Jackaloupe has its own nuanced advantage compared to most of the other dangers because of its stats, but instead of it being due to its type, it's actually because of its level. There are a cavalcade of excellent extra deck cards out there that need level 3 monsters to bring themselves out on the field, while also setting up your graveyard, which has made it the go-to option for the likes of Phantom Knights and dedicated adventure decks for years now. But Jackaloupe is a danger that's best paired with another, and fortunately for level 3 focused strategies, there's another good danger for them in Danger Suchino. Suchino is another danger where, no matter what you hit, you can't really lose, but holds a special place even amongst the best dangers, as when Suchino is discarded, you get to special summon it out from the graveyard. And so, unlike Nessie and Jackaloupe, doesn't need another danger monster in the deck to be useful. This allowed for Suchino to see play even in decks that don't want to dedicate a ton of space to generic extenders, as you can just play it by itself since it's always going to get you somewhere no matter which effect you get. But in decks that have been willing to play a couple more dangers, Jackaloupe and Suchino make an incredible pairing, but are great to draw for their own in-hand effects, and by discarding either, you'll get a level 3 monster on your board. Throw in Danger Nessie to the mix and you'll have the basis for an amazing danger engine already. If your deck discards a lot, then by pitching Nessie to activate a card, you'll get to add Jackaloupe, then by discarding Jackaloupe, you'll get to special summon Suchino. This leaves you card neutral with a free body on field, which might not sound like a big deal, but in this same situation without Nessie, you would have been 2 cards down, which makes the danger engine more than worth it. Now, the rest of the danger monsters don't have discard effects that net you any advantage by themselves, but some of them are so good that they'll still see a lot of use anyways, and nowhere is this better exemplified than in Danger Mothman. Mothman's on-discard effect is that you can make it so that both players draw 1 card and then both players discard 1 card. On the surface, this sounds mediocre at best. After all, it's an archetypal Dark World dealings that leaves you down a card at advantage while your opponent gets a free opportunity to cycle through their deck and set up their graveyard. But if you're playing the dangers in a deck that wants to get their cards into the graveyard in some way, then Mothman suddenly becomes a danger that always has a positive effect, because you'll either get the opportunity to summon a body while discarding a card, or you'll get to use this effect to discard a chosen card from hand instead, which is really valuable in decks like TheDuelLogs or Dark World that actively want their other cards to go to the graveyard rather than the dangers themselves. And Mothman is currently the only danger monster with an effect that gives you a choice of discard. So for these decks, any other danger would mean that they were always at risk at losing you the gamble, but with Mothman, you either win by discarding another card with a good graveyard effect, or you win by discarding Mothman to then choose what you pitch, which in the short term might be a direct loss of advantage. But depending on what you pick, it'll likely be more than worth it to activate certain effects. This isn't even where Mothman's utility ends though, because it also happens to have one of the best levels in the game, level 4, which makes the mountain of powerful rank 4 monsters easier to get into in decks like TheDuelLogs, which would often use Mothman to go into Time Thief or Doer as a way to trigger their TheDuelLogs monsters, and Dugar is the Timeless, a favorite of Dark World strategies both for its graveyard revival and its draw effect, which lets you discard a card to keep your combo rolling. There's also another level 4 danger monster that's good to keep in mind whenever you're considering the engine. That would be Danger Chupacabra. Although this one sees a lot less play compared to Mothman, as its second effect requires a little bit of extra setup, since if it's ever discarded, you get to target a danger in your graveyard and summon it out to the field. This effect has the potential to be strong, but it's situational. If you have a danger in the grave, then Chupacabra's effect is virtually synonymous with Jackaloupe and Suchino's, as it nets you a free body on field that you can use for whatever you like. But if you don't, then Chupacabra being discarded does nothing except lose you a card. So for this half of Chupacabra to be useful, you need to make sure you can set it up first. And for a lot of decks that are willing to play dangers, this isn't the hardest thing to do, especially if you start out with Nessie and a way to discard it, as that'll set up a danger engrave for you to summon as well as a way to get Chupacabra in your hand. But as a result of needing this setup to be functional, Chupacabra is rarely ever maxed out like the other dangers are. However, it definitely has a lot going for it, which keeps it in the running of being a pretty strong danger. Because alongside its rank 4 capabilities, its fiend typing is excellent for one deck in particular, Danger Dark World, where it being a fiend is relevant in summoning out the likes of a Bow when it uses its on-field material, and useful for being a good discard for the likes of Gates of the Dark World, the Dark World field spell that discards a fiend monster to banish a fiend from grave to draw a card. Which is pretty relevant given that Gates it's a soft once per turn and will be used multiple times before you hit the end phase, giving you multiple opportunities to revive a danger that's found its way to the grave. And if you summon out the likes of Mothman with Chupacabra after banishing a Genta, you're on track to summon a rank 4 of your choosing. Now, the final 3 monsters in the archetype all share an extra common trait. They're all level 8 monsters. This of course opens up the rank pool for easier access, especially in decks like Dark World that are natively already playing other level 8s. But this level also has some added utility for dangers, since it opens up the possibility of using a card like Trade-In, a draw 2 that specifically needs you to discard a level 8 monster to activate, which will then let you trigger the effect of whatever you discard. The worst of this bunch, and probably the worst danger monster of all, is Danger Ogopogo. Because on discard, all Ogopogo does is give you the chance to send a danger card from deck to the grave, and unfortunately, this doesn't count as discarding. So any danger monster you send is just going to sit in the graveyard. The reason why Ogopogo has this effect is that you can more easily access the graveyard effects of your danger spell and trap cards, as the likes of Response Team and Second Expedition both have fine enough graveyard effects, and so if you are trying to play a pure danger strategy, Ogopogo's second effect has its uses. But no pure danger deck has ever seen competitive success, as danger has always been used as a supplement to other strategies and help their plays get started. As a result, just like we mentioned before, even the most dedicated of danger decks won't play the archetype's back row, as they're all either hard to use, really niche, or just have terrible effects. But more on that later. The final 2 dangers are Danger Bigfoot and Danger Thunderbird, 2 level 8 monsters with somewhat similar effects, as when they're discarded, they both allow you to destroy 1 card on the field. In the case of Bigfoot, it lets you pop a face-up card your opponent controls, while Thunderbird will let you destroy one of your opponent's set cards. Now, from these effects, it's clear to see that both Thunderbird and Bigfoot's on discards are primarily useful if you're going to be going second while attempting to break a board, as if you happen to pitch them with their own effects, with the likes of a trade-in or through any other means, you'll be able to start chewing through your opponent's interaction with a must-negate effect. And even if you gamble on their in-hand effects and don't hit them specifically, they're still quite useful board breakers due to having the highest attack stats out of every danger monster, allowing you to beat over or at least crash with most of the game's strongest threats, or even build up the resources for potential push to lethal. As a result, going second strategies that use the dangers will often swear by either of these cards. Gren Maju especially saw value in the dual utility of these level 8 monsters provided when going second to either slap down a rank 8 or get rid of your opponent's most important cards. However, even dedicated going first decks like Dark World would still find utility in something like a Bigfoot, which gives the deck a couple more going second options while also not being too terrible to see when going first. Because while it would definitely suck to hit Bigfoot from a discard if your opponent has nothing to pop, if you summon it from a Jackaloupe effect, or use it while you have plenty of cards in hand, you mitigate most of that risk and still get to bring out a level 8 body to extend even further. In terms of the actually relevant danger cards, that just about does it for the archetype, as the rest of the deck is composed of spell and trap cards that have mediocre to terrible effects that genuinely fail to bring the deck together to be its own cohesive strategy. But even with the worst cards out there, it's always a good idea to know your options when you're not playing them despite their potential. So we'll briefly run through these one by one. Realm of Danger is a field spell that prevents your danger monsters from being targeted by your opponent during the turn that they're special summoned. This sounds okay at first glance, but none of the dangers have any kind of on-field effect that would make protecting against target negation important. And while it does stop removal, most decks using danger monsters use them as a bridge to an extra monster, which will be entirely vulnerable to being hit with any removal options your opponent has. Realm of Danger can also allow your danger to attack directly while preventing them from being targeted for an attack. And while this could be relevant in decks attempting to OTK, it's a somewhat niche use and requires that you have the ability to play through your opponent's board, which is going to be harder if you're a card down due to drawing Realm. Danger Feats of Strength is also a tool that can help with OTKs, as you can equip it to a danger monster to increase its attack by 800 and allow it to perform 2 attacks on monsters per battle phase. There's a lot holding feats back. Even if you equip it to your highest attack danger and swing into 2 monsters with 0 attack, your opponent will still have 400 life points away from being lethal, making it a mediocre OTK tool that needs a little bit of help along the way. But that's honestly just not worth it. For feats to always be useful, you need to be playing a going second strategy that has a high density of dangers. And while there are a couple of those out there, these decks are already more than well prepared to do a ton of damage to their opponent with far easier setups. Danger, Excitement, Mystery, and a Perfect World would be a great option for the engine, as it allows you to add a level 4 lower danger from your deck to your hand, but falls short in not only requiring that you have a high level danger to discard to use the effect, but also locks you for the rest of the turn into only being able to special summon danger monsters, which is rough in an engine that seems almost purposefully designed to be able to access generic extra deck options. Although there are a couple of ways to make pure danger strategies function, at least kind of. And that's with a couple of the deck's trap cards, which allow you to discard a danger at quick effect speed. Danger Zone is the best of the bunch, as it's basically a graceful charity, drawing you 3 cards and then forcing you to discard 2, with at least one of them being a danger. Otherwise, you have to shuffle your whole hand back into your deck. This is a cool effect. Not only can Zone draw you into hand traps, but it gives you ways of discarding something like Bigfoot during your opponent's turn, so that you can actually have some archetypal interaction. Although this is seldom played because it's only Bigfoot and Thunderbird specifically that work as something your opponent has to play around, and the rest of the dangers not having any effects that can actually put a stop to an opponent's turn. Notably, Second Expedition to Danger also has a similar issue, but a much worse effect. Like Zone, you get to use it to discard a card at quick effect speed, but only so a single danger monster you control gains 500 attack and defense. It does have a little extra strength at least, since it has a graveyard effect that makes it a target for either Foolish Burial Goods or Ogopogo's effect. And ultimately, this graveyard use of Expedition is fine. You get to discard a danger, put an Expedition to the bottom of the deck, and then draw a card. On paper, this is as great as it gets, as it nets you some advantage and a way to trigger a danger of your choice. It's just a little bit too difficult to set up for the brick that you have to play, especially with Expedition's on-field effect being so abysmal that it becomes a nightmare to draw. There's actually a second card with the same exact graveyard effect, Danger Response Team, giving you a second target for Ogopogo, but it still suffers from the same issues as Expedition in being a rough brick to draw. Although one with a slightly better first effect that allows you to target a danger monster you control, and another monster on the field, and return both to the hand. This isn't the most difficult thing in the world to set up when going second, which makes it a better card than Expedition for sure, but it's still an awkward to use option that's outclassed by better, more generic tools. It's at least not as bad as a card like You're in Danger, a pretty rough option for the deck. It lets you pick from 3 danger monsters in your deck to randomly summon one to the field, but that monster will be destroyed during the end phase. Having this effect on a trap card is so unfortunate. Like we talked about earlier, no danger has any on-field effect, so summoning them out on your opponent's turn is pointless. Your best bet with You're in Danger is to set it to your field, hope that you make it to turn 3, and then use it for extension into something else. But given how much it needs to go right for this to happen, you're probably just better off playing this card as a funny choice when activating Prohibition. The final card in the archetype is Danger, Disturbance, Disorder, and it's the worst the deck has to offer. Its first effect is one that only triggers whenever your danger monster is destroyed by battle, and allows you to destroy the monster that battled it. A form of removal which natively requires you to lose out on a monster to make work, but is made worse because your opponent can see it coming plain as day. So if there's a monster they want to keep, they're not going to use it to beat over whatever danger monster you have on field. So you'll likely be forced to use your own battle phase to get use out of this effect. It also has a bonus effect which can destroy all cards on the field, and this sounds great because you can use it to clear the path for a potential OTK by wiping away your opponent's resources. But just like Excitement Mystery, this effect is held back by having a lock on it, which would prevent you from summoning anything else except danger monsters for the rest of the turn, limiting your options, and by having a condition which needs you to banish 3 danger spell or trap cards from your graveyard so that you can use the effect in the first place. And given that most danger decks aren't willing to play any of the back row due to how bad they are, you're likely not going to be able to get much use out of this effect. Doubly so because most of the semi-playable spell and trap cards have graveyard effects that put them back to the bottom of your deck anyway. But even with the dangers having some of the worst back row in the game, the impact that this engine has had on the game's meta over the course of the history is undeniable. From FTKing in old Danger Dark World decks to being one of the best supplemental engines that helped tier limits dominate the meta prior to the release of the Ishizu cards, the Danger monsters, for the most part, are brimming with utility for their powerful extension and great discard effects that can feel downright busted in a strategy that knows how to use them. And with Tsuchinoko and Jackaloupe both freed from the ban list, now there's no longer any danger cards on the ban list, freeing this engine up to be used creatively in its entirety once again. And while Danger's current strength is mainly found as a pairing for modern Dark World decks, which are far from reaching the heights of meta dominance, it's only a matter of time until we sight these mythical creatures once more, as just as like the legends they're based on, the Dangers are timeless as an engine that's always going to be useful in some capacity.